Welcome to Friday at 4. I'm Guy Page. I'm here with Paul Bean, our social media director. And today we will be talking about when the big national news came to Vermont.
International.
International news, absolutely right. Paul, do you have that clip?
I do. And here we go. This is from WCAX, folks, just giving a brief synopsis on the situation we're going to be discussing today.
Learned a Massachusetts student detained by immigration officials was brought through Vermont after her arrest. You likely have seen this video already of Tufts University graduate student Rumeysa Azturk being arrested by masked immigration officers in a Boston suburb. Well, today we learned that after this video was taken, the 30-year-old was brought to Vermont. That's why the Trump administration says the Boston judge who ordered the federal government not to remove her from the U.S. doesn't have jurisdiction. The Trump administration says her student visa has been terminating, alleging, without providing evidence, that Azturk supported Hamas. Today, Vermont Governor Phil Scott said he thinks the Trump administration is stretching the limits of what it's legally allowed to do.
We should be ashamed that we've come to this level. A student visa, maybe we may not agree, all of us agree with what she was saying, but that's a right in our country. And this person should be allowed to do that. It's a constitutional right.
Azturk is not in Vermont anymore. She was transferred to a remote ICE detention facility in Louisiana. Her lawyers say her constitutional rights to free speech and due process have been violated. Learned a Massachusetts.
Back to you, Guy.
So I was sitting there when Governor Scott said what he did in response to a question from Vermont Public reporter Pete Hirschfeld. I respectfully disagree with the governor, because it's not just about free speech. It's not just about a letter that she wrote. What we have here is a student activist representing herself as a member of Graduate Students for Justice in Palestine, a sister organization, you might say, to a banned organization at Tufts University called Students for Justice in Palestine. And why were they banned? Why was this group banned? Well, besides doing things like blocking entrances, which college students do all the time, they also scheduled a week of rage. And they had memes and posters of people holding up assault rifles and saying, we need to escalate. And we need a student intifada. Intifada, of course, is the Arab struggle, mostly Palestinian struggle against Israel. So, and these were the same organizations that within days of 29 U.S. citizens being murdered by Hamas. 29 U.S. citizens. So this makes it 29. We have a dog in this fight. Okay, we have 29 of them, you might say. And so within days of this, organizations like Students for Justice in Palestine were out saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, and go, go, go. And it was only, I don't know if you remember, Paul, but it was only until the U.S. sort of said the Biden administration didn't wholly jump in on their side, and Hezbollah, a sister organization more on the Lebanese-Syrian side, didn't really do much either. And Israel started fighting back. Israel doing what any country has a right to do, which is to fight back when someone invades and kills 2,000 of your citizens, slaughters civilians. Only then did anyone start calling for the ceasefire. These organizations, they were not talking in the first few weeks about ceasefires. They were talking about from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. In other words, this is ours, and we're going to get rid of the Jews. So the only real question is, so this organization that she was writing letters to the president, college president about, and affiliating herself with a sister organization. And remember, she's not a U.S. citizen. She's from Turkey. She's not even from Gaza or Palestine. She's from Turkey. So how far do her free speech rights go if she is giving cover, giving sort of policy PR cover for this pro-Hamas organization? Can you be an alien in the U.S. giving some sort of cover for an organization that has killed 29 U.S. citizens? I'm not sure that the rights stretch that far. She can still exercise her free speech, but she doesn't have to do it in the United States of America. So what they did was they picked her up in Massachusetts, and they brought her up first to not White River Junction, but Lebanon, New Hampshire.
Close enough.
Right? And then brought her into, apparently for jurisdiction reasons. I didn't know that till I just heard what WCX said.
Yeah.
And thank you to WCX for that excellent reporting. They brought her to the St. Albans Immigration Center and processed her there or did whatever, and then brought her down to the Burlington International Airport, from where they then flew her out to her eventual destination in Louisiana, to a detention facility in Louisiana. So one of the questions that I think it was Pete Hirschfeld asked, or one of the other reporters asked, is, look, the feds are using our land here and our facilities in Vermont for their, what some might say, questionable detainment and immigration activities. Should the state of Vermont say, no, you can't do that. You can't do that on our territory? And what the governor said was, well, that facility up in St. Albans, that office up in St. Albans, that was acquired after much work and a lot of federal money with the help of Senator Patrick Leahy. And if you remember, they don't call him St. Patrick for nothing. St. Patrick of the earmark, St. Patrick of the federal funding, cash cow, patron saint of. So that's the last thing Vermont's going to do is to kind of push back against the federal government on something like that. In the airport, well, you really can't just say, oh no, feds, you're not allowed here. Yeah, we know you have a TSA office, and we know you have jurisdiction over an awful lot of stuff in the airport. The governor sort of stopped short of saying that Vermont can do anything about this, but he did kind of deplore it in a general sense, in a free speech way.
Okay.
So,
well, it's definitely a extremely controversial topic. This is one of those issues where, I myself have been grappling with it a bit. Free speech, no matter the cause. I say this to people all the time. No matter the cause, you should be able to say what's on your mind. As a student, however, an exchange student, I'm not sure we really want exchange students from Turkey influencing policy ideas in the United States. It seems a little bit problematic to me. I've kind of had this stance for a while too. I had a hard time actually getting into the University of Vermont. Meanwhile, when I got there, I realized that there's all these foreign nationals from China and the Middle East and like all these different places, and I'm like, man, how did these people even get into these universities? So I can understand there being a concern about having a foreign national from Turkey influencing some policy ideas or students. I can see that being problematic, especially when you consider what I just brought up to Guy before the show, which this was both, I didn't know this, Guy didn't know this. Turkey is considering invading Israel.
Whoa.
Yeah, here's the headline. This is from the Jerusalem Post. And Erdogan, who I believe is
Erdogan
is the president
Yes.
of Turkey. President, right? Calls for Allah to damn Israel as a Zionist Israel. Comes amidst Israel and Turkey's foreign ministries putting out harsh statements, as well as growing concerns about Ankara''s role in Syria. And that was
Ankara, the
Ankara.
capital of Turkey.
See these names? I'm sorry. I'm learning all about it. I'm just a Vermont guy. What do I know about what's going on over there? But it's interesting. How I've discovered this was communicating with a friend of mine who's actually skiing in Iran, of all places, which that might sound crazy to you when you first hear it. But when I'm speaking with my friend, he says, Paul, and everybody has that reaction when I tell them that I'm here. And I've been to Syria, I've been to Iraq, I've been to Israel, I've been to Palestine even. He's been all over. And he says, what we're told in Western media about what's happening in the Middle East doesn't really necessarily reflect what's true and what's going on in those spaces. He's actually of Jewish descent. I know his father is 100% Jewish and practicing. So he has a bit of a perspective that I at least really appreciate it, because I think sometimes it's such a hot and heavy topic. People are I never understood it until I remember when October 7th happened. I didn't even really comprehend why does this matter, but to have a level-headed perspective coming from him, there's a lot of things that have happened. There's a long history between these two groups of people, Israel and Palestine, and I think it's worth noting that, there's been 50,000 Palestinians killed by the Israeli government. I think it's worth saying that, and that includes 17,000 children since October 7th. That's a lot of people, so when you hear them, calling it a genocide, it's a large number of people that are getting killed, and that includes civilians. But that's all. That was something he pointed out to me, and I've heard this from other folks as well. But I still think that there's a bigger conversation to be had about what's happening. And if Turkey's serious about invading, this is another Muslim country, as I understand it now. So people know, I barely knew anything about Turkey, at all. But they're saying, hey, we don't like what's happening, and they're maybe considering invading Israel, which, man, that would be crazy. What would that look like? So I think there's a big conversation to be had. And again, she's from Rumeysa Öztürk. She's from Turkey. So maybe there are some concerns within the U.S. government about having a Turkian national here right now. Right. If that's something that's potentially going on. So
could be.
I think it's worth mentioning.
This has gotten the attention of Marco Rubio, our Secretary of State. Let me read some of the quotes. Department of Homeland Security spokesperson said, Öztürk engaged in activities in support of Hamas. Did not specify exactly what those were. Secretary of State Marco Rubio determined that Öztürk's alleged activities would have, quote, potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences and would compromise a compelling U.S. foreign policy interest, Tricia McLaughlin of the Department of Homeland Security told CNN. And she also said that glorifying and supporting terrorists who kill Americans is grounds for visa issuance to be terminated. So if you're on a student visa and you are engaging in activities that glorify and support terrorists who are killing Americans, no more visa. Go home. And so when they call that common sense security, when Homeland Security called that common sense security, sounds like common sense to me. I can imagine if your friend were over there saying suddenly, well, I think the U.S. is justified in bombing our nuclear sites.
In Iran?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm just guessing that they might be, if they're lucky, on the first flight out of Tehran.
Yeah, well, this is what he would say, and it's and I think this is honestly, it's a larger perspective. It's not just the Middle East that the Americans, I think we could do better at seeing it like this. He would say when he talks to these people in Iran and all these other countries, they don't have an issue with the people of America, because
Right.
they know that most people are just living their lives, going to school and church and working and these kinds of things, just like the Iranians mostly are, a lot of those folks. It's the U.S. government that they have an issue with. And to be fair, there's been a lot of wars in the Middle East, and the U.S. has been involved in a lot of them. And I can see how over the years people could have an issue with our country. I can see that.
I agree.
That being said,
Yeah.
if Turkey's to invade Israel, who's going to defend Israel at that point, right? Israel's going to defend Israel, right?
I bet they are.
But if you look at the size of their militaries, right? Like, this is something that I found last night researching too. Obviously, United States, biggest military in the world ever, right? Turkey is like number 7 on the list.
Really?
Yeah, I didn't know that either. I was shocked to find that
Wow.
out. I was like, what?
Huh.
And they have a lot of airplanes and actually more sophisticated tech than I ever would have thought.
Are they members of NATO?
They are. Yes, they are. They
Yeah.
are members of NATO.
Huh. Okay.
Which, well, let me double check that, because I was talking to somebody as well who said this morning that NATO didn't want Turkey to join. Don't quote me on that,
Yeah.
but basically, Israel's army and military size is only up to a certain point comparatively. I think it's like maybe 12th or 13th, and a lot of their arms and airplanes, and I mean the F-35, right? That comes from the United States. So I think what I'm trying to say is if this does actually happen and there's other countries in the Middle East that unify against them, I don't know what that's going to look like. Does that mean the U.S. is going to defend? And I can say from my perspective, and a lot of military folk that I know, they don't want to do that. So I think it's let's see, I have a comment here from Lusangs Ludwig, who says, Turkey has been in NATO since 1952.
Oh,
So
thank you very much.
thank you very much for that.
So maybe part of the plan here is to send a real message to Turkey and the rest of the world that we're not playing around here. We're not of two minds, which the Biden administration certainly did a good job of putting across. And they're saying, no, Israel's our friend and Hamas is not.
Yeah.
There's a saying, Paul, that if Hamas stopped fighting, there would simply be no more war. If Israel stopped fighting, there would be no more Israel. So really, it's sort of like Russia and Ukraine. You have to ask the question, who invaded who? Who started this conflict? And it is terrible that Russians are dying and Palestinians are dying. But those wars could be over really fast if the people who started them decided that it's time to stop them. But
There's a deep history.
Yes, there is.
I'm learning a lot about it that I didn't know, and I guess what I'm trying to say though is, like, I would hate to see the American military be involved in a conflict again
well,
in
they're
the
trying
Middle
to
East.
avoid that.
And my whole thing is like, I mean, people laugh when Trump talks about Canada and Greenland, but like, I mean, I don't know. There's probably a handful of reasons why we're in the Middle East, but I think one of the biggest reasons is because of the resources that the world needs, not just the U.S., but the world needs. Saudi oil, Europe is dependent on Saudi oil, There's a lot to be said about that, but I guess what I'm trying to say is I'd rather just see us do our own thing over here on this side of the planet, and I don't, if that's what it's going to come down to over there, I don't see why the U.S. should have to defend them. I don't think that they should. I don't think American lives should be at cost to do that. And when people do go fight in wars, right? I mean, it's typically young men, right? And I think we've learned in history time and time again that war is often young men dying for the causes that they don't even really understand or know about of just more powerful people that are in powerful positions. And millions of men in the last 100 years, 120 years, I guess,
Sure.
have died in wars that, I mean, in World War I, the saying was, we're here because we're here, we're here, we're here because we're here. Nobody know why, you know? And
Right.
I guess I just don't want to see more death, more destruction, more pain, because it's a horrible thing, you know?
Yep.
It's a horrible thing. So,
Yeah, true.
but with that, I think we should go to an ad.
I think you're right.
Okay. Oh, whoa. Hold on a second, folks. Today's episode is brought to you by Randmar Corporation. Randmar Corporation has been serving central Vermont and surrounding areas with excavation, construction, and real estate services since 1979. They're a local, family-owned company committed to the values of Vermont. Contact Randmar Corporation today for all of your contracting and real estate needs. Thank you again to Randmar Corporation. I think with that guy, we should also let everybody know that today is, in fact, our 1-year anniversary. Well, 1 year and 2 days. Our first episode of Friday at 4 was on April 2nd, 2024.
Wow.
I can't believe it. We've been doing this for a year. Guy,
Wow.
thank you. I just want to say thank you for everything. This is a honestly really special moment. And we've just come such a long way. I mean, we have sponsors. You know,
Yeah.
we have sponsors now. Like when we were doing it. Why don't we give everybody a little taste of what it was like when we first started our
please
first
do.
episode? This is last year at Bean Studios in Northfield, and here is just a little bit. This is Guy and I. We kind of just talking away. We didn't even really know what we were doing at this point, but
You're going to go to New Hampshire,
yeah,
and you're going to buy a car there, which a lot of people do already anyway.
For a lot of stuff,
Yes. And so
not just cars.
you'll be seeing, that's right, and so you'll be seeing a lot more of that, and where, people are smart and they will find a way to wriggle out from under onerous regulations.
Yeah, which seem to be ever increasing every single day. It seems like they're trying to.
that's what I look
pass this
like.
in
I
one
can't
way or
believe
another.
that.
And I hear a lot of people saying very similar things to you, and it's really a question.
I can't take it anymore, Guy. I look ridiculous. I can't look at myself anymore. I'm blushing. Oh my God, my hair was bad in that
Well,
episode.
you at least didn't look 30 pounds heavier.
Well, that's another reason to celebrate.
Yes, that's right. That's right. But you got to start somewhere, and you were thanking me, but Paul, this was all your idea. It was Bean Studios. You were picking out the equipment. I didn't know how to do any of this stuff, and you do, and so good job.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I appreciate it.
I hear, by the way, you had a couple pretty interesting shows this week. You want to talk about that?
Yes. So two things. I had an episode with Allison Despathy. We called it Fighting Oligarchy in Vermont. And we were kind of just playing on Bernie's whole, tour to end oligarchy or oligarchy tour. I don't know what he was calling it exactly. But yeah, we talked for a while. We talked about a number of topics. And I think the whole point of it, the whole premise of the show was basically just to get people thinking about how they could oppose some of the the oligarchy that even potentially exists right here in Vermont. I actually had some comments on the show, and then from a couple of the people who were saying, this is from Neil Johnson. He said, "Who are the 10 people or so? Come on, let's get some names. You had a great interview."
That's a very good idea, Paul.
I know.
Who are you and Allison thinking about?
Well, he was pointing out you had a great interview with a representative who laid it all out. Get him back on, please. And you can interview those people at length. And he's talking about when I did the episode with Jay Hooper, who kind of made a comment that seemed some people really were upset, saying that 10 or 11 people are basically making all the decisions in the Vermont State House. I'm not going to say that's necessarily oligarchy, but there's definitely
Yeah.
there's maybe something to be said. Oligarchy. When I think of an oligarch, though, we're talking like multi-billions, billions and billions. And
Well, it literally means the rule of a few, and whether you rule because you're the gazillionaire or because
really?
you simply have the power.
wow.
Well, and it's a really good question, folks. If you got some comments on this, who has the power in this state? Who's really pulling the strings. I'm going to throw one of them out there. So Jill Krowinski drove up from Pittsburgh as a college student to work on some political campaigns. She was hired by Planned Parenthood to be a lobbyist and vice president, and was appointed to fill a seat by Governor Peter Shumlin, fill a Burlington seat. And within a year or two, she's Speaker of the House. So what that tells me is that one of the oligarchs is Planned Parenthood.
Wow.
And the general sort of movement that represents. And she's been, as Speaker of the House, she has an awful lot of sway on things.
Your point saying that there's oligarchs right here in Vermont, I guess I didn't even think, like, the definition of oligarch in my mind was just like uber wealth controlling an entire nation. But you're right, it's the rule of few with a lot of power. And
right.
it's funny, too, because it's like we're talking about, and if you really wanted to fight Elon Musk, for example, that was kind of the play that we were trying to make, where it's like, instead of just going out and destroying Teslas, right? How about the advanced clean car and truck mandates that are about to hit Vermont that you just heard us talking about from our first episode, actually, which is funny that we were talking about that. But that was one of the things that we mentioned, how this clean car mandate actually would help Elon Musk. Yeah,
Can't have that.
So it's like, if you actually wanted to do something, maybe consider addressing that instead of just screaming into the wind and protesting every Saturday.
Which, by the way, Saturday, for those of you who don't know, tomorrow there's going to be a lot of rallies all over the state of Vermont that this indivisible group is putting on, and other associated groups. Basically, the sort of the angry left in Vermont, the angry feeling somewhat disenfranchised and wanting to let people know how upset they are left in Vermont. And probably not just in Vermont, they're probably going to be coming from around the country as well.
Well, tomorrow is a 50-51 rally, I believe, at the Vermont State House. And I was looking at some of our names that were going to be speaking there. I'll talk about it. Yeah, I'll talk about it.
Sure.
Madeline Kunin's going to be there.
Okay.
Peter Welch is going to be there. Former governor.
Current senator.
That's right.
Okay,
current
that's
senator.
one of the oligarchs right there.
That is maybe two of them, actually. I mean, arguably. She's not governor anymore, but she might have a lot of sway within the Vermont State House. But point is, also, Lieutenant Governor of Vermont will be speaking tomorrow. I'm actually, I am going to be there tomorrow. And I'm curious to see what he's going to have to say.
You are going to be there?
Yeah, I'm going to go.
Are you shooting pictures?
I'll take pictures.
Well, good.
I might even go live for a little while.
Please.
Yeah, I am going to be there. And I'm not there to be an adversary. I'm there to listen.
Yeah.
And I'm there to see what people have to say.
Be like a reporter.
Be like a reporter.
Yeah.
And I'm hopeful that John's message, though, is more of a unifying message and maybe tries to ease some of the anger. I know that people are upset, and to some degree, understandably, but the rage and the anger and the fury aimed at Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and J.D. Vance, and the oligarchs, like you say, it might not be the best use of your energy. And that was kind of the whole purpose of Allison and I's episodes. Like, you could actually just like engage with your political process here and maybe make some changes that would affect that. And then furthermore, like, why ignore on your own party where there's oligarchs, right? Like, I mean, Bernie, the hubris to not recognize the oligarchy that exists within the Democratic Party, for Bernie Sanders to say that, and he's been screwed, in my opinion, out of two Democratic...
By the oligarchs.
By the oligarchs.
Yes.
So for him to not even address that and act like he's, on this high horse, I don't know how people trust him, and I don't know how people are still getting fooled by him. I can admit to a certain point, sometimes I'm like, oh, what's Bernie got to say? And then I listen to it, and I'm like, oh, that was interesting. But then he just continually just like flips the coin on me, and it's like, there's nothing that I don't, as far as I'm concerned, he might say some stuff sometimes that's true, and that's why I think he's good at getting these big crowds and big groups of people to show up, because the truth is potent. But with his message, comes a lot of disinformation, in my opinion, and also just omittance of pertinent information that matters, like the fact that you've been screwed by the oligarchs twice. Why not look at the oligarchy within the Democratic Party? You're only attacking Donald Trump. It makes no sense to me.
Right, right. So you've got in Vermont, certainly Peter Welch. I would say that my guess is Patrick Leahy is certainly an oligarch emeritus, and maybe still is. I don't know.
Actually, yeah, that's now that you're kind of pointing it out. I mean, St. Patrick, the guy who brings
Yes.
all the, they're like not
Patron
even,
saint of pork.
like,
Let's be honest.
These are like global oligarchs. These are some of the biggest oligarchs right here in Vermont. You're
Yeah.
actually totally right about that. Allison and I didn't hit that point home hard enough, I think, actually, looking back on our show. But we did get a positive response from folks. I've heard a lot of good things. People liked it, the people that watched it.
Good.
So
I think other oligarchs in Vermont, I'm not sure quite as much as they used to be. Oligarchs rise and fall, but the renewable power industry at one point was, getting anything they wanted, and we were all paying for it. And if the idea of an oligarch is we get richer at the expense of the peasants, well then, that's a pretty good description of Vermont oligarchy in the renewable power industry, because everyone was paying for them making their money with the sort of government carve-outs of subsidies and all that sort of thing. Jim, you got any ideas on any Vermont oligarchs?
I mean, I would say Bernie Sanders himself.
Bernie
And-
Sanders himself.
Yeah?
Just in case folks didn't hear what Tim said, he said, I would say Bernie Sanders himself. That's a pretty interesting one, Tim, because why shouldn't he be considered an oligarch at this point? Sure, maybe he's not necessarily a billionaire, but he is a millionaire,
Yeah.
multi-millionaire.
And frankly, what's the point in money if it doesn't get you what you want? He has more power than he does money.
And what does he care about? He cares about political and social change. He doesn't really care about money, I guess, anyway. And he's on the cusp. The reason he got up out of that chair 2 weeks ago when this hapless CBS reporter was interviewing him and saying, so what about AOC? And he says, oh, I'm not going to talk about that. And he gets up to leave, is because his one last shot at turning the world into Vermont, the U.S. into a workers' paradise, is getting AOC to run for president or someone like her, and maybe the stars align, and maybe what he couldn't accomplish, he can be the kingmaker for AOC, and finally, the U.S. will have a socialist president.
Yeah.
And so that's what he wants. That's his end game. And he's been so close twice.
Yeah.
And now maybe third time lucky.
Well, that's what I don't get is like he's still beating the same drums, like some of the same drums, I should say, right? I want to come back to that point, but I've heard rumors that he himself might even run for president, which seems crazy because he's so old.
He himself said in that interview, he said, well, I'm getting pretty old and pretty tired. He didn't exactly say no, never.
Yeah.
But the message was, nah, I don't think I'm going to do that.
Yeah, well, that would be interesting. But to that point, Bernie has been beating a lot of the same drums for a long time until recently. Suddenly, he's like totally against everything Donald Trump's doing with the tariffs. However, back when NAFTA was first created, he was one of the strongest oppositional forces at the time.
And why?
Because it would hurt the American workers.
The workers?
Yes. it
Oh,
would
the
hurt
workers the Democratic Party abandoned, but he didn't.
That's right. That's
Wow.
right. And I mean, to be fair to Bernie, I wouldn't even. Would you say that he's abandoned the workers? Because I think he's still.
I'd say less than most.
I would say less than most as
Yeah.
well. I think he's still got, some things that you can point to and say he's been consistent. But this is one of those things where it's like, even in 2008, I just watched this video. I can pull it up if you want. It's pretty funny. But he's basically saying like, it's wrong that we get all these countries are screwing us. Basically,
Well, why
It's
don't
like
you
this-
pull that up? And while you're doing that,
Sure.
I will. We were looking back in our last year of doing Friday at 4, and we had two people on, Michael Flynn, former General Flynn, and a Republican strategist.
Is that
Sorry.
Go ahead.
You're good. You're good. Keep
and a
going.
Republican strategist named Mark Serrano. And they both said, kind of admire Bernie. He's actually quite a bit like Donald Trump. And he really, cares about the worker, and he's a straight shooter. And so, again, you have a parallel with Bernie and President Trump in that they both really genuinely care about the American working person.
Yeah, or at least we'd like to believe that he does.
Yeah.
And I'm talking about Bernie. And here's Bernie in 2008 on the floor of the Senate talking about tariffs and NAFTA, I believe.
further, what they have said is that we need to not worry about manufacturing in America, because what we should establish is a policy of unfettered free trade. We don't need tariffs. What we need is to allow corporate America the freedom to throw American workers out on the street, people who are making 15, 20, 25 bucks an hour, health care, pensions, throw them out on the street, because somehow, Madam President, we are going to create wealth in America and good paying jobs in America as we shut down plants, we move to China, corporations there pay workers 20, 30 cents an hour, and we bring the product back into this country. And anyone who goes shopping in a mall knows how difficult it is today to find a product made in America. But that is the philosophy. And I have to say, in that regard, the champion, and he is honest on this one. Senator McCain has been criticized recently for not being the most honest candidate we have seen in terms of his ads and so forth. He has been honest on this one. He is the lead advocate of unfettered free trade. And that's an also important part of this right-wing ideology, that it is good for America that corporations can go to China and bring products back into this country.
And I
Preach it, Bernie. Preach it, brother.
Isn't that crazy? I wrote over the top of that. I wish Bernie still thought like this. What happened? And I got quite a few views on it for a little post like that.
Yeah, where is he at on tariffs? I have to admit, I'm not really too up on
He's
that.
saying that all these tariffs are going to do is benefit the billionaire class
Oh, I
and the
see.
corporations.
Wait a minute, Bernie.
It's almost like it's that's always what it's about. It's never actually about helping people. It's the billionaires it's their fault.
Right.
It's their fault, no matter the case, no matter what the case is. It's always the billionaire's fault.
Yeah.
And it's funny as I've right. It's
I have a story about that. I was running a Burlington newspaper, and covering a city hall meeting, and he was then the mayor, and an oil company had just given a huge amount of lakefront property to the city of Burlington. Just here's $1 million worth of property. Burlington, it's all yours. And for the first and perhaps only time in his life, Bernie Sanders was speechless. He was like, because here, an evil corporation, an oil corporation, has just done something incredibly altruistic and helpful, and it just didn't fit in his world,
Well, I think that's the thing. It's like he approaches it with the ideology, as General Flynn said, he really is a socialist. Mm-hmm. So viewing everything through that worldview, it's always the corporation's fault. It's never anyone else's problem, or it's their fault, or political party. It's the corporate, it's the richest, it's them, it's everything. So with that, I do think we should mention some comments. This is from Greg Pulaski. He writes, Bernie's message is correct. It's just that he hasn't done anything about it. And to be fair, as somebody, that's a really, really good point. And I agree with you. I think that a lot of the stuff that Bernie has said over the years, he's right about, but you look at the bills he's passed or the legislation he's in, like he hasn't, I think he has never passed a bill. if I'm not mistaken.
Well,
one
he
that-
got a post office named once.
Well-
And he did do some heavy lifting on some of the big bills that passed in the COVID era.
Okay, so fair, right?
Yeah.
And that's fine and all. Interesting, actually, that you say that, because that's kind of when we've seen a big change in Bernie, in my opinion, at least in the last 4 years. But you know, he's been right about some things, but he's hardly have anything passed that he's introduced. I don't think he's ever had anything passed he introduced, except for maybe that the post office that you mentioned.
Something like that.
Something like that. Greg also writes, he's a career politician. As we all know, that is right. So, you know, it's interesting to watch. You know whose take I'd love to get on this tariff talk and see what he would think of maybe what Bernie thought, or maybe he wouldn't tell us, but maybe he would. It's Dan Cunningham's. I'd love to get his take on that.
Oh, and who is Dan Cunningham? Perhaps now is a good time for an ad.
Yeah, well, today's show is also brought to you by, let me pull it up for you here, folks. Sorry. There we go. One Day in July. Today's episode is brought to you by One Day in July. Investment management as financial advisors. One Day in July provides personalized investment management and financial advice to individuals, families, and institutions. We work with clients to understand their financial goals and build investment solutions. They are fiduciaries on all accounts for all clients. And I'll tell you why I'd love to hear his take, Guy. As an investment man who probably knows a little bit something about how the tariffs would affect the stock market, I bet he'd have a lot to add to this conversation. You know, how will people either benefit or be hurt long term? You know, I see a lot of people panicking right now because maybe their stocks are down or their 401ks is in shambles, right? And I would just say to anyone panicking right now, it's probably the time to buy. If I'm not
Right.
mistaken. I mean,
Right?
for every positive force or negative force in this case, there's an equal positive force. So maybe just think of that. I mean, if I had a stupid amount of money to play around with too, I'd probably buy some stocks. But you know, that's what most. I mean, that's what the smart people I know that are good with money. They're saying, yeah, buy now. So
Sure.
and
I gather Tesla stock has gone down. Boy, if I had an extra few grand laying around, maybe I'd pick up some Tesla stock.
Well, it was funny. Right after Tim Waltz said,
Oh, yeah.
yeah, it said basically to, you know, what did he say about Elon Musk? It was like,
He said he was thrilled that the stock had gone down.
that's what it was.
Yeah.
And that's when everybody faded him and then went and bought. Actually, Tesla's doing pretty well again. So
Oh, is it?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. I can pull it up if you want. But the point is Trump said today, he said something like, now is a really good time to get rich in America. And I think his
Right.
point is saying, I mean, everybody in business knows, like, that's the time. The smart people I know that are good with their money, who I
Yep.
trust for financial advice, they would say now's the time to buy.
It's called
Now-
a market correction. Yeah.
Yeah, and to say that Dan would say the same thing, I don't know what he would say.
Right.
But we definitely
Not putting words
not
in
putting
your
words
mouth.
in anybody's mouth.
Oh, favorite sponsor. We're
That's-
really not.
We're not saying anything. He might say
Yeah.
something else, but we definitely we want to have him on. So we'll see if we can
Sure.
swing it sometime. But
So speaking of politicians on the left making statements about fiscal policy, we had a little clip at the end of last week's show that has since gone national, big national news. And I don't know if it's time for another commercial before we get to that.
no, we can do this first, and maybe after we talk a little
Yeah,
bit
sure.
about this, we can come back to it. So this is Teddy Wasasak in House Ways and Means Committee. This is not last Thursday, but the Thursday before.
And he's right here in Berry City, where
right.
we do our 802 Scoop studio.
That's
Yeah?
right. That's where we film from. So here's Teddy. This is on Fox News. I'm going to full screen this for y'all. And here's the sound. And here we go.
Thank you, Representative Maslin. We just have 1 minute. I see lots of hands. I also, Austin, you came in and did a presentation with little houses and dogs and families and stuff. And you have not responded at all to the proposal around homestead exemptions, which I imagined you were going
I've
to
gone
have an opinion.
20% through my notes because
Okay.
we've had some great discussion.
So you're welcome to come back at a future time.
No, sorry, I feel
We're
very
good.
strongly about this. I feel the need to say this. The market picks winners and losers. It is the job of the government and tax code to right size that. So yes, we are picking winners and losers because the market is already starting that dynamic for us, and it's our job to make sure the right people are winning.
I think that there's a place for government in, playing referee and mitigating factors that are in the market. I don't think that it's appropriate to be picking winners and losers, targeting specific classes of payers based off of likes and dislikes. I think that's a dangerous and slippery slope.
I don't.
Wow.
Yeah.
When worlds collide, what you have there is Teddy, how do you pronounce his last name?
Wasasak.
Wasasak,
I'm pretty sure that's how
who
you
was
say it.
a longtime Bernie supporter. When he was in his early 20s, was getting applauded by Bernie for some of his statements, saying, absolutely, the government tax policy should be picking winners and losers. And I don't know how I feel about that, because their ideas of the winners are, the renewable power industry, which makes really, really expensive power, and maybe the middle class, and maybe only, they have their own sort of values and judgment about who should be winners and losers. And I'm not sure they're really what's good for the country. And then the other side, you have Austin Davis, the other fellow who said, I'm not sure this is such a good idea, who is with the Lake Champlain Chamber. Austin is one of the really smart, young thinkers in the state of Vermont.
Level-headed.
And just very insightful, very articulate, thinks things through very deeply. Always has. He's been around the State House for 10 years or so. He's right out of college. And a very thoughtful guy. And he just made a really good point. I'm not really sure we want the government picking the winners and losers here.
I don't even want to be picking winners, and I would never want to be picking winners and losers.
Yeah.
What does that say about you? And I'm not trying to get personal here, but
Yeah.
what do you think you are, Teddy?
He's the voice of the people.
Yeah, I guess. Are you a winner
Right.
or a loser, or are you supposed to just be a referee?
It comes down to the argument of the market picking is the market is basically thousands of people making decisions. Red Sox home opener this afternoon, and I had to choose, since we don't get it at TV, I had to choose which pub to go into to watch the Red Sox home opener.
Oh, no.
Well, I wanted it close to the studio, and I wanted to make sure that they had the sort of snacks that I could eat, because I didn't want to have huge gloppy onion rings, right? So I picked McGillicuddy's about 2 blocks away from here. So that worked for me. That was my choice to do that. And it would really tick me off if the government or someone said, actually, we think for various reasons you need to go to someplace in, I don't know, Waterbury. I don't want to go to Waterbury. See, and I know I'm being sort of ridiculous.
But you're not, though.
Yeah.
That's the whole, you could say that, Guy, that's not even comparable, right? But if we start letting you pick winners and losers on the homestead property tax rate, where do you stop, right? And that's the mentality of somebody like that. Like, he gave us a real insight, and he's not just kidding around, like saying he's not that, what makes
well, how about what car? They'd never tell me what kind of car I could buy, would they?
Exactly.
Oh, yeah.
And that's what makes me like just cringe is like, it's not like he had a Freudian slip or something. He was like I need to say this.
Yes.
Like, you need to say that?
Right.
I mean, look, that is fine. I mean, have your opinions, freedom of speech in America, but don't be shocked. You won by 40 votes, Teddy. It's not a lot of votes, man.
Yeah.
And that's one of those things that you say that, your constituents, maybe they might not pay that close attention to it right now, but that's going to come back to bite you. I think it will. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but if there's a strong Republican candidate, I mean, the response that I got on my Twitter page from some of the people I know that live here, they were like, I'll do anything I can to get that guy out of office. And it's just like, whoa, okay. But that's one
Yeah.
of those things where, I don't want Marxists in my government.
And speaking of tax policy, that committee that he's on, the House Ways and Means Committee, that's the tax committee. They're the ones who really do pick the winners and the losers on taxes. Well, do we have a clip or anything of the general and his talk?
I can pull that up, yeah.
A brief thing, especially on, while you're doing that, General Knight, the Adjutant General of the National Guard, made a pitch to the legislature Wednesday night. And one of them was, we need people working here in Vermont, and we want former Guards people from all over the country to settle in Vermont. So it would be a really good idea if you did what almost every state now is doing, and every state around us is doing, New York, Massachusetts, New Hampshire. They are all giving income tax exemption on military pensions. Income tax exemption on military pensions. Every state around us is doing this. I think it's either 31 or 38 other states give this. Vermont doesn't. Well, someone in the legislature had the temerity to propose in a bill that particular item. And it was in a bill that the House, that the chair of House Ways and Means basically yanked that bill right off the floor. Said, nope, not going to talk about it now, because it had that. There was such powerful opposition in some very important quarters in the state's legislature against giving a tax exemption to people who have served in the military. And to be fair, Pete Hirschfeld brought up, again, a Vermont public, brought up a really good point, that Ethan Allen would be rolling over in his grave if anyone, because of their occupation, was given a favorable tax status. It's a good point.
That is a good point.
But there's also, I kind of think that horse has sort of already left the barn.
Yeah, how could he say that?
Teddy's already said that the horse has left the barn.
How could he say that? I mean, I'm not picking on him, but like that's the whole. I mean, that's not him specifically, though. But that's a lot of their ideology, at least on the left. I'm not going to say it's necessarily Pete.
And they'll give it to tax breaks for BIPOC businesses all day long.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's either good or bad, but they're down with that, okay? But boy, some military person who maybe wants to move in, boy, they're probably not going to vote the right way, are they? No, we're not really sure we want that. And so they fight that tooth and nail.
So I have a quick bit at the end of it where I wrote this story. I said, he urged lawmakers to support programs that would increase enlistment and recruitment, including a proposed bill, S-17, to exempt military retirees' pensions from state taxes. Some lawmakers have told VEC that S-17 has bipartisan support and would be a great opportunity for the legislature to show that they do, in fact, have the ability to work together. And that, when I said that, I'm referring to a conversation I had with, he's a new young legislator named Zach Harvey. Is it Zach Harvey?
Oh, Castleton, yes.
Yes, he's a great dude. I like him. Smart
Remember
guy.
that name, everyone.
Yes, definitely.
Zachariah Harvey Castleton.
He's a good one. He's a very just upbeat, young, positive legislator. Smart. And he told me that. And that was one of these things we were just talking about. Like, what are things in the State House that Republicans and Democrats are having conversations about? And he said that that's one of them, and it seems like it really makes a lot of sense to do that. It's interesting, though. I could see why maybe they wouldn't want to pass it, and here's why. This is what I'm theorizing. All right, hear me out, folks. I'm spitballing. Maybe they don't want military folks to come and retire and move here in the state of Vermont.
Why wouldn't they?
Because they might vote conservative.
Oh.
I mean, hey, look, I'm not saying that that's 100% the case. I don't know, but if there is an incentive to get them to come live here. I mean, hey, look, the reality is, I don't know if that's going to break the bank for these guys. If they're looking at Vermont and they're concerned, let's say they're concerned about cost of living just in general, they're not going to come here, right? especially if you're getting taxed on military pensions when there's other states.
Right.
I believe 32 other states that aren't. So I'm not sure that that's going to break the bank or not, but it's definitely worth noting as well. With that, guy, we should go to our final sponsor for today.
We should.
Before we wrap this up. Today's episode is also brought to you by Procter Gas. Are you a homeowner wishing to convert your home to propane gas so you can enjoy energy efficiency living and off-grid? Alternatively, you may be a contractor seeking propane tank and line installation and related services for your clients. Either way, Procter Gas is here to help. We provide comprehensive services and a variety of products and leading brands in Rutland, Vermont, and beyond. Procter Gas is our first sponsor, and Judy Taranovich, from the beginning, she's been a big supporter of the show.
Yeah.
Honestly, Judy, I want to celebrate this with you today, too. We hope you're out there listening, and we know you watch us every week, or at least you go back and watch if you can't watch us live. So your support really means the world to us. This is so cool, so fun to be able to do this. And I'm sorry if I just butchered your ad there. I was just so excited to read it. I couldn't get it out fast enough.
So Judy mentioned that I might be able to collect one of those hats.
Yeah.
If I come down to an event, and I think it's on the 12th. And Judy, I just wanted to know, I am thinking about doing that. That sounds like it'd be a lot of fun. So you are wrong, sir. We do have at least one more sponsor.
You are right. I'm pulling it up too.
Well, I sure hope you wouldn't forget.
I'm sorry that I almost
how
did.
Quickly they forget one of the
I
best
know.
times we've had together as a staff member on our little staff retreat with the assault rifles, as they call them.
That's right.
Which actually, the Kalashnikov AK-47, that is a legitimate assault rifle.
They both they both technically could be considered that. But the AK, you're right, is specifically made, like literally specifically made for war.
That's the point.
The AR-15 is arguably for other purposes. I personally wouldn't want to hunt with one. Some people do.
Yeah.
I think that's a little overkill maybe, but some people would disagree with that. They would say, no, you're crazy. But I'm not a big hunter anyway. But yeah, the AK-47 definitely would be considered
That would scare away every deer within 5 miles. That thing.
That was definitely the loudest.
Holy
the loudest
cow.
This is a comment from Joseph Cannon. He writes, "Great show. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on local news." Hey, we're happy to have you. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
And with that, we'll go to our final ad for today. Today's episode is also brought to you by Perros Gun Shop in Waterbury. Discover Perros, Vermont's premier firearms destination. Explore an unparalleled selection of firearms complemented by their exclusive indoor firearm range, the only one of its kind in Vermont. Elevate your skills with their comprehensive training and classes tailored to every level of expertise. At Perros, they are dedicated to providing exceptional service and expertise for all of your firearms needs. And man, they do have a state-of-the-art facility there.
It's awesome.
It's so cool. If you've never shot a gun and you want to learn and you're interested but you're afraid, I think that's the best place to go do it. You know, it's definitely intimidating to pull that trigger, you know, but
boy, Carrie did it right away.
That's right. What a rush.
Yeah.
That was the first time she'd ever shot one.
That's right. She had no hesitation.
No problem with it.
Hey, speaking of initiatives, when's the Creamy Stand open?
Good question. I'm opening next weekend.
Next weekend?
I'm going to open on Friday next week.
Wow.
Yeah.
What flavors are you going to have?
I don't want to make any promises because I don't know what's available right now, but definitely vanilla. I can guarantee that.
How about the yak burgers? When are they coming?
That's going to be at the that's going to be probably the first weekend in May. So I'm also I guess I could talk just briefly about this. I'm also planning I'd actually be curious to have people's feedback. I'm planning a weekly roundup in Northfield. I'm thinking of doing it Thursday or Friday night. And the idea is, if you haven't heard of the roundup in Waitsfield, they used to do a gathering of like a handful of food trucks and some vendors, and they'd have somebody there serving some beer, and they'd have a band and some. It was really just honestly, it was so cool because everybody would gather from the community, parents, kids, all that kind of thing. And I'm trying to bring that back a little bit, but just over the hill in Northfield. and maybe bringing some life to our town. But I'm like so torn. I go back and forth on this. I'm like, do I want to do that on Thursday or should I do it Friday? A lot of people say don't do it Thursday because of Thunder Road, but I'm like, well, I get all my car guys on Wednesday nights for Cars and Creamies. So, and then Fridays are of course people go to camp or they're traveling. So
Friday at 4.
Friday at 4, that's another thing. So there's something to consider there. That's a good point. I mean, I had thought of that, but we were talking about maybe figuring another way to do that too. So
Right.
we'll figure it out, folks. And there might be some changes for Friday at 4 coming in the future that we've discussed as well.
Right.
So
And one final shout out, I've hired, I guess, Colby LaMarche of Burlington to be the new managing editor of the Burlington Daily News. And starting, I think, Tuesday, he will be publishing every day news on that website, and that is only going to grow.
Yeah.
And it will be eventually a paid subscriber site. Very excited about it. And if you care about Burlington and about Burlington news, you're going to have to read the Burlington Daily News.
Absolutely. With that, Guy, I think it's time we sign off. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in. We hope you have a wonderful weekend.
Can we sing the Carol Burnett song?
I'm sorry?
Can we sing the Carol Burnett song?
I don't know it. Do I know it?
These kids, they don't know anything.
What song is it?
I'm so glad we had this time together. No, but we're not going to sing it.
I don't know that song.
That's right. You weren't born when the show went off the air. Anyway, good night, everyone. See you next Friday. Thank you, Paul. Thank you, Tim.